Before we begin this afternoon, I'd like to say a few words on behalf of the whole Parliament about the truly terrible recent events in Newtown, Connecticut. The tragedy that happened at Sandy Hook School on Friday, which saw the death of 20 wee bairns and 6 courageous teachers, is almost too much to contemplate. I know that the families will find some comfort from their friends and community at this most desperate time. As a country, we have suffered a similar tragedy of this nature in the past, and I have therefore today written to the Speaker of the Connecticut General Assembly, offering our Parliament's support and the sincere sympathies of all members of the Scottish Parliament. We now move to topical questions. Question number 1, Rob Gibson.
To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to reinforce sea defences following the recent severe weather.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
Firstly, with your forbearance, Presiding Officer, I want to express my sympathies to those affected at the weekend, particularly to the family of the man killed as a consequence of the weather on the Voss Sailor. On land, the severe weather has impacted on property and infrastructure, causing disruption to lives and to businesses. The extent of the storms which affected the whole of the East Coast has been reported by many as being the worst in a lifetime, and I also want to commend the harbours, local authorities, frontline responders, as well as many in the local communities for the speed of their response and the work to pick up the pieces afterwards. I chaired 2 Scottish Government Resilience Room meetings over the weekend, which brought together key agencies and the emergency services to monitor developments on the ground and to coordinate our response. In the immediate aftermath of the weekend's severe weather, the Scottish Government is collating an assessment of the damage, and as part of this, Richard Lochhead and Keith Brown have visited the most affected ports and harbours. Following these assessments, and with further information received from other harbours, the Scottish Government will continue to work in close partnership with councils and agencies, and we stand ready to provide assistance in any way we can.
Rob Gibson.
I thank the Minister for his answer, and I'm sure that people from Shetland to East Lothian will welcome that the Scottish Government actions. I hope that you can apply the principle of preventative spend to strengthening coastal defences and adjacent drainage, because as you're going to assess the damage, the costs of repair for weakened and breached seawalls are part of that, but also making urgent funding streams available from national and local assets to build resilience is needed to increase the resilience of these many ports, harbours and seafronts against the instances of severe weather events.
Minister.
Certainly, I recognise the points that Rob Gibson makes, and I'm very pleased to announce that John Swinney, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Employment and Sustainable Growth, confirmed yesterday that the Scottish Government was activating the Bellwyn scheme, which is a discretionary scheme to give the financial assistance to councils who face an undue financial burden as a result of large-scale emergencies. Aberdeenshire Council and Murray Council have already made representations to the Scottish Government as a result of the severe storms of the weekend, and Mr Swinney has said that he looks forward to working with those councils who apply to the Bellwyn scheme to ensure that resources are made available as appropriate. More widely, the Government, in the point about preventative spending, the Government recognises the importance of preventative spending in managing flood risk, and that's why we've tasked SEPA with carrying out a national flood risk assessment for Scotland. The understanding this assessment gives us of where flooding is likely to occur, and the impact when it does will allow us to target our efforts in managing those risks. And indeed, in agreement with COSLA, it's separately identified that local authorities can now bid for funding for new schemes in excess of £2 million. A total of £73 million is available on top of the £53 million of funding that was allocated to existing projects, and which was included within local authorities' general capital grant allocations.
Rob Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Minister for that list of potential funds. I hope that he can take into account the economic impact on vulnerable coastal settlements and the jobs that are affected, because the more extreme sea and weather conditions that we are now receiving on their coasts are not being able to be coped with by antiquated infrastructure, which needs adaptation and mitigation to climate change that wasn't recognised when that infrastructure was being built. So there's a special need, indeed, Minister, to assess just what the costs of that will be.
Minister.
Well, clearly, as Robert Gibson is well aware, there are businesses that have been badly affected by this most recent incident, both in onshore fish processing and indeed in the oil and gas sector, and my sympathies do go to them. The Scottish Government would expect local authorities to take the likely effects of a changing climate into account, and I think that's an important point in designing or upgrading their flood and coastal protection work, including designing schemes to allow adaptation to deal with climate change at some point in the future, and interventions and approaches that are not sustainable long-term should be avoided. It would be worth mentioning that on Friday we actually made an announcement about what the Government is doing in terms of funding a forward programme to assess the risk of coastal flood planning, indeed we're looking to see how we can accelerate that to assist local authorities understand the scale of the risk to them in their local areas.
Ian Gray.
The Minister mentioned that his colleague, the Minister for Transport, made a very welcome visit to North Berwick yesterday to see the damage at North Berwick. Harbour, if Mr Wheelhouse speaks with his colleague, I think he will explain that although he saw the emergency repairs which had been made to the damaged south-west seawall, that the long-term solution to the problems at North Berwick are to replace the sea defence boulders on the south-east with a proper higher sea wall. This will impose a significant capital strain on East Lothian Council's capital budget, and I would be grateful if the Minister could confirm that the Scottish Government would look favourably on an approach from East Lothian Council for Belwyn funding or other funding streams to support that project to provide long-term defence against the sea in North Berwick.
Minister.
I certainly do recognise the scale of the impact that has been in North Berwick, having not seen it myself firsthand, but I have seen footage of the damage in the harbour and know that it was severe. In terms of the implications for Belwyn, as I understand it, Belwyn would not necessarily cover the scale of project that Mr Gray is mentioning, and certainly I'm happy to meet with him and to discuss what would be possible. I think Belwyn is designed to almost replace on a like-for-like basis damage done to harbour walls, and certainly in terms of the funds, principally the gap there might be in relation to, say, an insurance excess that the Council cannot meet, and to fund the revenue cost, but it's not ideally suited to assisting with large capital projects. That would be more in the territory I was referring to in relation to the answer to Mr Gibson's point. And indeed, would be happy to engage with Mr Gray in looking at what's possible under existing capital funding through local authorities, and with my colleague Derek Mackay to see what's possible.
Liam MacArthur.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. The Minister will be aware that the storm damage is extended well beyond ports and immediate sea walls. I'm not sure if he's aware that as a result of the recent storms, around 2 miles worth of the sheep dyke on the North Isle of North Ronaldsay, my own constituency, has been severely damaged. There's been some support provided through a variety of mechanisms, including support from the local council, but I wonder whether he could advise whether either the Belwyn scheme or the other schemes that he's identified may be a productive port of call for the people of North Ronaldsay to repair the damage to this antiquated structure, but still very necessary structure on the island of North Ronaldsay.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the member for raising the issue he mentions in regard to North Ronaldsay. I wasn't aware of the damage that he mentions. I haven't had any discussions to date in terms of the application of Belwyn in relation to that kind of project, but I'd be happy to take that forward and write to Mr MacArthur in terms of what might be possible in relation to Orkney, if that would be of assistance.
Stuart Stevenson.
Other members have referred to the effect on vulnerable communities. In my constituency at Peterhead, we have the world's biggest offshore oil support base that has been severely affected by these storms, and therefore it can have major economic impact both in the local area and much wider. What practical assistance can the Government provide that would be relevant to the situation in Peterhead?
Well,
Minister.
I know the issue that the member raises was of some concern to the First Minister when we discussed this in the Ministerial Resilience meeting on Sunday, and indeed we have the ability through agencies such as Scottish Enterprise to work with local businesses to assist where possible if they have difficulty implementing their disaster recovery plans and other measures. Clearly, in an instance like that, assistance in terms of providing alternative accommodation is absolutely crucial at this time to ensure that the business can continue to function on an ongoing basis, and certainly we'll undertake to have dialogue with the member about what we can do in that regard.
Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. 15 metres of the Lossiemouth seawall was destroyed at the weekend. Can I seek an assurance that this will be funded under the Bellwyn scheme? And in Kingston, again in Murray, the sea defence has reduced, with properties in Beach Road seeing a vastly reduced shingle bank that many believe will not protect them from another storm. So will the Scottish Government provide financial assistance to Murray Council as a matter of urgency to replace the lost shingle and to enter into discussions about longer-term options?
Minister.
I certainly identify with the issue that Mary Scanlon raises, because I raised it myself on Sunday in relation to Kingston. I was aware of the recent history of having to invest in shingle bank there to protect the town. It's something, I suppose, that will be taken into account in terms of the representations that Murray Council are making already to John Swinney and to the Government in relation to the application of Bellwyn money. As I said in response to Mr Gray, that the funding would not be necessarily available for large-scale capital projects, but in terms of meeting the exceptional cost the Council has to deal with in terms of the recovery from this particular incident. And in that respect, I'm sure we will be in a position to help them, but hopefully we will be able to keep a dialogue going with Mrs Scanlon in terms of what action is being taken in relation to Murray Council and keep her informed of progress on that.
Nigel Dawn.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The Minister will be aware of the fact that in Stonehaven there was significant damage, but he may not be aware of the fact that there is actually a unique local charity there, the Marine Rescue Institute, which not only provides the local Coast Guard at the period, but also trains lots of folk. Now, they lost both their boats over the weekend. I gather they've got one back, but they lost they had a lot of damage to their buildings. And they, as a local charity, in the same position as others will be, that they've got excess money on their insurances, which a charity will be asked to find. This will be many thousands of pounds. Is that something which the Government may be able to assist with, please?
Minister.
Indeed, I'm having ongoing dialogue with the ABI, and we're hoping to meet ABI in February to discuss a number of issues in relation to flood protection for communities across Scotland. Clearly, in relation to voluntary sector organisation, I would have a concern if they did face a punitive insurance premium or indeed an excess in order to secure flood insurance, and I'd be happy to meet with the member to discuss the specifics in relation to the particular organisation he mentions, and I'd be happy therefore to raise the issues that come out of that meeting with ABI in February.
Question number 2, Liz Smith.
To ask the Scottish Government what provisions it's making with local authorities for the allocation of the additional £1 million for musical instrument tuition in schools.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government is providing £1 million to the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland for the purchase of musical instruments. The Conservatoire will consult with local authorities to ensure that instruments are allocated to areas of greatest need. This will enable many more aspiring young musicians in schools to learn to play a musical instrument. The Government is also setting up an instrumental music group to look at the issues of delivering instrumental music tuition in schools, including the question of charges for pupils sitting SQA music exams. The Government believes the shared ambitions and goodwill that now exists around these issues will result in a solution.
Liz Smith.
Could I welcome the announcement from the Scottish Government on this issue? Clearly, one of the most important commitments that the Scottish Government has made with this announcement is the removal of fees for those who are studying SQA exams in music. Could I ask for clarification as to whether this will be brought into force straight away?
Cabinet Secretary.
I pay tribute to the Scotland Sunday newspaper and its campaign, Let the Children Play, which has been instrumental in drawing attention to a whole range of issues in this regard. The group will have a remit which is being discussed with its chair, who I can announce is David Green, the former leader of Highland Council, to look at the range of issues. And one of those is the question of charges for pupils sitting SQA music exams. I've made it clear in questioning, for example, at the committee, that I think this is an undesirable development. It exists in 5 local authorities, but it is not an illegal development, and therefore I have no power to impose upon them any new situation. What I would hope to do is that the group, with the discussions that are taking place, with this type of discussion, with the presence of the fund, with the work of the Conservatoire with local authorities, will move those local authorities into a position, like the other local authorities, that they are not charging for these things. And the sooner they make that decision, I think the happier we all would be.
Liz Smith.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That is good to hear that these discussions are underway. Could I also ask you whether you've got any considerations about the opportunity to set up music trusts, which is on a similar basis to some leisure trusts? And I know your colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Culture, has showed some interest in that. Would that be a possibility for at least paying some of the fees that are due?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think that the issue of music trusts is a separate issue, but I know that the Cabinet Secretary is working with COSLA on those issues, and I'd be happy to ensure that the two developments communicate and feed off each other. Because the core aim here is to make sure that young people get the chance to learn to play music, to enjoy music, to be involved in music, and that's something we all want to see. And if there are barriers to that, then I hope the group, working with others, will overcome those barriers.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Very much welcome the Government's announcement about the £1 million for music tuition, but I wonder how the Government will safeguard those affected by this, insofar as there are many local authorities who currently make very good provision for local students, and we would not, of course, wish those students to be in any way penalised, or indeed those local authorities to be penalised because others perhaps have not been so helpful in the past.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I don't intend that this positive announcement should penalise anybody, so I would encourage the member to be positive about this development. This is good news. I hope that there will be no diminution of provision in any existing local authority that does things well, and those authorities that have a different approach, I hope they will look at that, discuss it with ourselves, and some are already doing so. Discuss it with COSA, discuss it with the people who are running the fund, and discuss it with the group. And I hope that common sense will prevail. But this is not to diminish anybody's opportunity. This is to increase opportunity.
Alison Johnson.
Thank you. I too am very pleased to welcome this new funding for instruments. Music tuition is a life-affirming experience. It should be open to all young people who want it. However, concerns have been raised with me by constituents that special schools may not have access to the new instruments. Can the Minister confirm, the Cabinet Secretary confirm, that the arrangements made with local authorities will include access for special schools?
Cabinet Secretary.
I can see absolutely no reason why that should not be the case, and I'd be very happy to say that that would be the intention, to be as broad as possible. Music is life-affirming, and it's life-affirming for every child, and every child should have the opportunity to learn.
Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too welcome the announcement. A little like Patricia Ferguson, I'm in the fortunate position of representing a constituency where there is currently no charges for music instrument tuition. But as a result of the announcement, what reassurances can he give that decisions taken by the likes of Orkney Islands Council, which have not been uncomfortable in the sense that it's avoided difficult choices being made about where spending is allocated, that in a sense the support will be there for those sorts of councils in the future to ensure that the good quality provision and the free provision is maintained over the medium to longer term?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, virtue is its own reward. And those authorities that are doing this well and doing it properly will now be able to continue to do so. And there's nothing in this announcement of any sort that will threaten that. Quite the reverse. We're encouraging others to come to the table and be as positive as Orkney.